Hello, profilers! It's time for our weekly rendezvous.
The podcast that shares with you true cases of French crimes.
And now, part 2 of
The Red Sweater. (1978). 2 years have passed since the execution of Christian Ranucci. Gilles Perrault, a well-known author, met the victim's lawyers several times, as well as the mother of the tortured youth, Héloïse Maton. He wrote a book entitled The Red Sweater, proving the innocence of Christian Ranucci. Today, Gilles Perrault has no doubt of Ranucci's innocence.
Today, yes, I can say I'm convinced of Christian Ranucci's innocence, as long as the scenario of the accusation doesn't stick. It doesn't hold up anymore. It doesn't make sense anymore. We can no longer believe the accusation scenario. Well, I can't. We can't bring you proof of Christian Ranucci's innocence. To bring you proof of Christian Ranucci's innocence, we'd have to bring the real murderer in. We don't have him, or demonstrate that Christian Ranucci, the day of the crime, was 5,000 kilometers away from Marseille. But no, he wasn't 5,000 kilometers away. He had an accident, on the contrary, right next to the place where we would find the body of Maria Dolores.
The first thing Gilles Perrault calls into question is Ranucci's confession, particularly the origin of his confession, the first lead that had condemned him. In other words, the testimony of the Aubert couple.
What do you find in the dossier? That they started talking by telephone with the military police about a package, about a man fleeing the scene with a bulky package. Twice they talked about the bulky package. And then their testimony evolves, and finally their bulky package becomes a little girl who talks with a reedy voice. So to understand what she says, you've got to be close by. So what does this mean? Witnesses who first talk to the military police about a bulky package, and then a little girl who says something inappropriate with a reedy voice, who says, "What do we do now? Where do we go?" You can't be serious. It's thanks to the witness testimonies of the Aubert couple that we find the body of Maria Dolores Rambla. So that makes two things. Firstly, they saw a scene, a place where we would find the body of the child. And secondly, they bring the license plate number of Christian Ranucci. That is indisputable, and no one can object to that. And we won't refute it. And I don't refute it.
Gilles Perrault states that it was not Ranucci that the Aubert couple saw on the side of the road, but another man who had taken his place in his car. However, in Ranucci's confession, there is a rather disturbing piece. A drawing that represents the city of St. Agnes, the place where Maria Dolores was kidnapped, drawn by Christian Ranucci himself. He makes an extremely precise map where every detail counts for him, since he also points out the presence of grass in the drawing. The police also indicate that Ranucci describes the place perfectly. He even points out a street that goes up to the place where he took the girl.
A street that slopes upwards. The directions are very basic. A street that slopes upwards, a low wall or an embankment I don't know, an embankment? Well, fine. It was a scribbled drawing. Just a scribbled drawing.
But this scribbled drawing would weigh heavily on the court's decision, because it was a drawing that represented the exact place of the kidnapping. However, Gilles Parrot affirms that it's missing a sycamore tree, a simple detail in a drawing where nothing has been left out. His lawyer explains,
I don't have much to say in response to the drawing, except to tell you, I admit, like the knife, it's an accusatory item. As for me, I never said Ranucci is innocent. Nothing accuses him, and everything's fine. I never said that.
Another problem. A lawyer who doubts a crucial piece of the case. In the Peugeot 304, Ranucci's car, the police discovered a pair of pants stained with blood of the same blood type as Maria Dolores. One of the police officers said they had taken Ranucci to the mushroom farm during the crime reenactment so that he could indicate where he had hidden the knife. Ranucci complied and showed the exact spot where the knife had been found by police a few days earlier. Allegedly, Ranucci explains exactly where to find the knife, but instead of starting the search where Ranucci indicated, the police start from where they found Maria, a good kilometer away from the site. They finally found it after about 2 hours of searching with a metal detector. When Gilles Parrot asks the police commissioner why they didn't start directly from where Ranucci indicated, the police commissioner gets offended, saying he's not stupid. If Ranucci had told them precisely where to look, they would have started there, bringing into question whether Ranucci really gave them the exact location of the murder weapon. This knife also comes back into question, as there seems to be some confusion about the knife's arrival at the lab. Some reports mention its arrival before Ranucci ever explains where to find it. Ranucci doesn't deny that this is his knife when they present it to him. But was it really found at the scene of the crime? Or is this a setup to find someone guilty, given that Ranucci had previously confessed but was now going back on his word?
The Marseille police acknowledged receipt of the knife before it had been found. But they tell us 'twas an error with the date on the official report. The report had been created the day before, so it was dated the previous day. So then, instead of closing one report and creating a new one, we added the knife to the other one. But the knife, in fact, it was received on June 7th. So really, after it was found 24 kilometers away from Marseille, fine. If it was the only oddity, if I can say, anomaly in the report, but we find them on every page, every step of the way.
Had the police made some mistakes in the case? Especially since the traditional fingerprint test had not yielded anything. No physical trace of the child in the car. Another important fact was that 2 hairs were found in the car, one of which, according to the experts, was compatible with the victim's hair. However, the other hair did not belong to Ranucci.
Ranucci eventually goes back on his confession, convinced of his innocence in the matter, but it is far too late.
I say to him, Ranucci, okay, you're innocent. Let's say we accept that. There are things wrong in the report. We agree. The knife, it really is quite troublesome. It's possibly the murder weapon. Okay, and you have always said that it was yours, and you've never gone back on that. So he thought about it a moment like this, and he said to me, you're right. It is quite troublesome, the knife. Perhaps I need to say it isn't mine. But in the report, I want you to know that it's mine. What do you do with that?
But it's not over yet. In this mushroom farm, the police found a red sweater, and this would bring up a lot of questions. This famous sweater, which would cast doubt in the Ranucci case.
There's this red sweater that is brand new. A little out of place in all of this. It's clear it doesn't belong to Ranucci. Even at the time he was confessing, he said, "This red sweater isn't mine." Later, it would take on the importance that we know it for.
It's a man that I call the man in the red sweater. That is to say, a man who was seen in the inner city of Marseille in the days leading up to the kidnapping of Maria Dolores Rambla. And this man here was trying to kidnap children, approaching them. He succeeded with 2 young girls that he had touched, right? He tried to kidnap other children. It didn't work. And then, unfortunately, it worked with Maria Dolores Rambla.
Shortly before the crime, witnesses in the area confirmed that they had spotted a man in a red sweater driving a Simca, accosting little girls using the same modus operandi as for Maria Dolores. According to Ranucci's defense team, it was this man in the red sweater who abducted Maria Dolores with Ranucci's car. It was this man who left his red sweater in the mushroom farm where Ranucci was seen by 2 witnesses on the day of Maria Dolores' murder.
It cannot be Christian Ranucci, the man in the red sweater. First off, the red sweater doesn't fit him. He's drowning in it. And then, especially, some attempts by this man in the red sweater at the end of May. Well, Christian Ranucci was in Nice, 200 kilometers from there. He was at work with colleagues, so it can't be him. Besides, he hates red. He has never worn red clothing.
The police set aside the red sweater, still unexplained, and go directly to the obvious. In June 1974, the Ranucci case is now under investigation. But a new twist appears in the case. None other than Jean-Baptiste Rambla, Maria Dolores' little brother, the sole witness to the kidnapping. The little boy is taken to the police station where Ranucci and his car are located, the Peugeot 304. The police had recovered it to search the vehicle. The boy is shown this car and asked if it's in fact this car that the young man had taken his sister in. He answers no, it's not this car. He was then taken upstairs for a police lineup. 4 people, plus Christian Ranucci, with rather identical clothes, stand in a line, and Jean-Baptiste is asked, "Which one is the man who kidnapped your sister?" The young boy answers, "The man who kidnapped my sister is not here." Eugene Spinelli arrives at the police station, the auto body mechanic and neighbor who also believes to have witnessed the kidnapping, since he saw the little girl get into the vehicle of her own free will. He was also shown the car, and he answered without hesitation, "No, it's not this car." An even more serious problem was that he did not recognize Christian Ranucci either during the identification. The Aubert couple were the only witnesses to recognize Ranucci. However, during the identification, Ranucci was alone, leaving many questions unanswered about this investigation.
For me, what hasn't ceased to bother me in this affair? It's the absence of a response to the question, why does he kidnap this child? If we admit that he kidnaps her, with an explanation for the kidnapping, after all, we can finally admit that he kills her. Because he's afraid, or because this, or because that, but no one has ever concerned themselves. First off, to explain why he kidnapped the child. Yet, the kidnapper's identity, the witnesses who are there. There's Jean Rambla, who is a little boy. Okay, but that doesn't make him an imbecile who doesn't recognize him. There's Spinelli. He started by saying positively that it was a Simca.
But the investigating judge does not care about this detail. Certain doubtful details won't be reviewed. Blinded by the charges, the judge botches the crime scene reconstruction. On December 27th, 1974, Ranucci appeared one last time before the investigating judge. He was upset because his lawyers were absent, despite the summons. Ranucci goes back on his confession, adding yet another twist in this case. He claims that his confession was written under torture. He declares, "The policeman who brought me back from Nice to Marseille hit me several times on the head to make me confess something I hadn't done, before finishing with, 'I don't agree with anything.'" He reiterates,
At first, I truly thought my guilt was possible. Today, I think the contrary. I recognize, however, that I was the one who told the investigators where the knife was and who it belonged to.
a strange thing to say for someone who is going back on his confession. He declares himself innocent. His lawyers say he is innocent too. Ranucci's reaction in court is another strange element. During the trial, he cooperates calmly up until the moment the police commissioner arrives. At this point, he loses his temper and becomes very agitated. While some doubt his guilt, others remain convinced of it. Jean-Louis Vincent is a former police commissioner. In 2017, he published a book entitled The Ranucci Case, From Doubt to Truth. In his investigation, he returns to the elements that accuse Ranucci, and according to him, there is no doubt. Christian Ranucci is truly and clearly guilty.
It's clear that this man is the perpetrator of these events, but how can I put this? All of this comes from Ranucci's speech. It's Ranucci who told them, "I killed her." I don't understand very well. It's not like anyone else was in on it, etc. It wasn't that. Ranucci said, "I killed her, and that's that." Gilles Perrault claims that the military police, this is important, the military police made the dogs sniff the red sweater which had just been discovered a few minutes before in the mushroom farm. But this red sweater no one could have imagined, and nothing enabled them to say that this red sweater had any connection whatsoever to the affair. The little Jean Ramblas, at the time he talked about the man who came saying, "I've lost my dog," and then left right away with Maria Dolores. He never said that the man was wearing a red sweater. So Gilles Perrault says they had them smell the red sweater. But in fact, when you look at the report of the dog handler, he doesn't say that at all. A starting indication, it's called. In other words, when they have the dogs sniff, and the dog handler explains that they had them leave from the spot where Ranucci's car was found, in the mushroom farm, 48 hours before. And when Gilles Perrault hears this, he shouts, he says, "It's impossible. They can't have dogs leave from a spot on the ground. That's nonsense. He's mistaken. He should inquire with professionals, and he'll see." I agree. It's not an ideal starting clue, of course, but as they had nothing else, what do you do? And today, these dog handlers, I know some in the military police, if there's really nothing else, they try having them start on the ground, saying to themselves, at such and such place, perhaps there was so-and-so who could. It's not ideal, but it's still done like this. The whole story of the red sweater came after, because a man in a red sweater assaulted 2 little girls in another neighborhood of Marseille. Gilles Perrault makes the connection between the two and thus says, "As we've found the red sweater in the mushroom farm, it can only be the one that the man who, 3 or 4 days before, assaulted those little girls, and as we made the dogs smell this red sweater, and the dogs went to the body, well, there's a connection between the red sweater and the body of the girl." The dog did take the path that led to the body of the girl who was on the road. He took 40 minutes to trace the path, and I did the math. It's very simple. He did 1.8 kilometers an hour. I can tell you, having verified it, once a dog gets a scent, he is really following a lead. He goes 5 or 6 an hour. He pulls on the leash, and the dog handler holds him back. But the dog handler isn't going to start running. If not, he would probably go even faster. So, the path should have been done in 15 minutes if he had really been following a scent. He takes 42 minutes. He goes past the 30 meters, the place where the body is found, and there they say he stops. In fact, in the dog handler's report, he explains that he doesn't stop. He goes past the 30 meters, and the dog handler himself brings the dog back. It's him who brings back to the body, which means it was already discovered. It had already been discovered because the body had been discovered before the arrival of the dog. Simply, there you go. The dog. Is he going to go there or not? It's still interesting to know. But the dog goes past it by 30 meters. They bring him back to the road, and the dog doesn't do anything else. He doesn't move. There is no connection between the dog search and the body of Maria Dolores. Ranucci says, "I put this knife in a pile of manure, a few meters, that's located a few meters in front of the entrance to the mushroom farm. And it's likely, this is what the commissaire Alexandra told me. For that matter, the police were ready to leave with Ranucci. We'll put him in the car, and we'll look for it with his own information, but the judge prefers that it's the military police on site, and while waiting that they present to Ranucci to charge him, as they used to say. So they go there with a metal detector. The pile of manure, you gotta remember, it was about 25 meters long and 8 meters high, a big hunk. And so the military police search, and around 2 hours later, they end up, of course, finding the knife. The military police, who take it out of the manure pile, explains that they open the knife carefully. It was a switchblade, an automatic knife, and they perceive that on the blade there is still blood stains. This knife, stained with blood, found with information from Ranucci. It's the major #1 argument that proves Ranucci's guilt. If someone could explain to me how we could say a knife is at this place, it was used to kill a kid, and when we find it, it's covered in blood. If someone could explain to me how this could invent itself, I'll buy it. But I am incapable myself. If now I decide to tell you that a knife is in some place, go look for it if you'd like. I'm not sure you'll find it. Gilles Perrault himself says it. There's a show during which he is interviewed by Laurent Joffrin, who asks him how he got interested in the affair. And Gilles Perrault says, "It's a friend, Jean-Denis Bredin, who talked to me about it, and who told me, yes, there were some pretty strange things in this. You should go check it out, etc., etc." Who is Jean-Denis Bredin? He's a lawyer who at the time was strongly opposed to the death penalty, who is hired by Mrs. Mathon, the mother of Ranucci, for the review processes that were being implemented that never succeeded. So Jean-Denis Bredin obviously tries to have some arguments to weigh in favor of Ranucci's exoneration. But at the same time, it's very well known, he is strongly opposed to the death penalty, which is of course strictly his right, and so when he sends Perrault to sort of work on this case in Marseille, again, it's Perrault who says this. He gives a little guidance on his selection.
On March 9th, 1976, Christian Ranucci appeared before the Assize Court of the Bouches-du-Rhône, France's criminal trial court. The courtroom was full. Tens of thousands of people had turned out to demand justice. The population wanted the death penalty for Ranucci, and even in the courtroom, one could hear, "Death to Ranucci! Death to Ranucci!" Christian Ranucci became arrogant and aggressive in the courtroom. His lawyers asked him to calm down. But he was so convinced of his own innocence that for him, this proposal is nothing more than a game. During this trial hearing, an unexpected testimony came forth from a lady who had already been heard in the proceedings. She came before the court stating that her daughter and one of her friends had been attacked in Marseille by a man wearing a red sweater and driving a Simca 1100, a week before the kidnapping of Maria Dolores. The lawyers claimed this is proof of innocence, that it was impossible that it was Christian Ranucci, since he was in Nice the weekend before. However, questions remain about the authenticity of this testimony. When the public prosecutor asked how this woman came to be involved in this case, she said that she had met Ranucci's mother at the Beaumetz prison in the visiting area in Marseille. The testimony was therefore cancelled on the belief that Héloïse Maton and this woman had agreed to create a false testimony. A surprising element in this case is a question about the death penalty. The family of the victim, Maria Dolores, were completely against the death penalty. His lawyers, obviously, also fought for his sentencing to exclude this harsh punishment. Even the French president was outspoken against this kind of punishment. Despite another recent case of a very similar crime receiving a much lighter sentencing, Ranucci wasn't spared. Was this case a fair trial, or more so a judgment passed down in the court of public opinion? Pressure from the French public pushed for Ranucci's death, despite all those involved being against it. After 6 hours of deliberation, the verdict came down on March 10th, 1976. Christian Ranucci was sentenced to death, and applause erupted in the courtroom. There would still be some surprise twists in this tragedy of a case. While awaiting news about a possible pardon, a local radio issued a press release that the president had indeed granted Ranucci's request. It seemed that he would be spared. Ranucci's prison guard would announce the good news to him directly. His mother was informed as well. Everyone involved felt an incredible joy until a new announcement was made on the radio. They had made a mistake and issued the wrong press release. Just a half hour later, all hope of pardon was destroyed. July 28th, 1976, in a Marseille prison. It's 4 a.m. and he's sleeping in his cell. The eve of his execution, the presidential pardon has been refused. Being the youngest ever to be condemned to death, everyone thought that the President of the Republic would pardon this young man. But it wasn't so. They prepare the guillotine. 5 minutes later, at 4:05, Ranucci is awakened. He is taken to death row, 5 people accompanying him. He is still half asleep. When asked if he wanted to write a letter, he replied, negative. A priest approached him, and he refused with a wave of his hand. They placed Christian Ranucci on the guillotine. His lawyer puts a hand on his shoulder. At 4:13 a.m., the blade falls. Christian Ranucci is beheaded. As far as the courts are concerned, the Ranucci affair is over. Justice has been served. "45 years later, the myth of his innocence persists, and the Ranucci affair has never truly been closed. His death would serve as cause for the abolishment of the death penalty in France. The Ranucci case hasn't stopped feeding the news cycle. More recently, Michel Fonliré, a rapist, criminal pedophile, and serial killer in France, has been suspected as the murderer of Maria Dolores Rambla. Yann Lemeur, author of the book Blood and Ink and What If Christian Ranucci Were Innocent, declares, "I am firmly convinced that Ranucci was innocent, that he was the victim of a combination of circumstances and of place, that he crossed paths too closely with the real culprit of this case." Could this truly have been an example of wrong place, wrong time? Not long ago, Jean-Baptiste Rambla, the little brother of Maria Dolores, was also accused of a crime, double murder. He is currently imprisoned at the Baumets in Marseille, the same place where 40 years earlier, Christian Ranucci was guillotined. His father declared in a statement,
"I lost my first child, murdered, slaughtered with stones, 15 stab wounds, hit with stones on top of that, massacred her skull, all over. I didn't even recognize my child. And then, now almost 32 years later, I have my son in prison. The same one who was playing with his sister. He was 6.5 years old."
As for Heloise Maton, just after Christian Ranucci's death, she would start the fight to prove her son's innocence and would be determined to abolish the death penalty. She went to his grave every day. She tried several times to reopen the Ranucci case for retrial, but to no avail. Mrs. Maton died on March 14th, 2013.
Thank you for watching this video.
We are excited to share these stories with you and to honor the memory of the victims worldwide.
If you enjoyed this story,
You can help us out by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and punching the notification bell.
very important, don't forget to give us your opinions in the comments.
Thank you guys again. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Au revoir!
Au revoir!